Today we have with us Val Novikov, CTO and co-founder at FISPAN. FISPAN is in the business of providing next generation business banking channel for banks. FISPAN works in a highly regulated space, selling their fintech solutions to large financial institutions to make them more productive and provide better customer service to their end users. In this podcast, Val is going to share how they looked at security and compliance ground up as part of their startup journey and helped succeed by getting customers in this space. Val has a wealth of experience both as a technologist, individual contributor in the security space, and as a leadership role as a co-founder and CTO in this fintech startup. Welcome to the show, Val. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your company that you were a founder of?
I've been building software products for about 20 years now. And I kind of took the journey step by step, like instead of quitting college and starting the business. So I kind of did my time in developing the software, like leading the teams, building engineering. After about 15 years of doing that, so I co-founded FISPAN, which is a business banking SaaS product. It's in the fintech area. We've been doing it for about 6-7 years now. FISPAN been the biggest product I've built so far, and it's been a great joy building.
Fantastic. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about, you're a fintech providing products to banks. So what problem are we solving? What does the tech architecture, what does the tech landscape of FISPAN look like? Given that you mentioned it's one of the biggest products you build, I want to drill a little bit more on that.
From the business side is banks do struggle to innovate, and they're not technology companies. They're not, software builders. They try occasionally, but they struggle with this. That's why they reach out to, fintechs to help. And most of the fintechs actually, they take the positions very unfriendly to the bank. They say what, you dinosaurs, you're obsolete, people shouldn't be using you and we will take over the world. And obviously banks don't like that, right? Yeah. So we took a very different approach, we said nobody's going to get rid of the banks because there are regulations, and somebody still need to be custodian of the money, it's like banks are there for a reason. They're just a little bit slow and they need help. So, and that's kind of how idea of FISPAN started. We looked at the banks, we looked at the customer base, and their business customers are the most underserved ones because their service is pretty complex, and their experience is not great. So, and we looked at how to make it better. So, and we built a product that helps banks to retain the business customers, and provide them a more modern, banking experiences. So, and that includes tight integrations into the financial applications, ERP applications such as NetSuite, QuickBooks, Microsoft ERP products, Oracle products. So basically, we kind of brought banking where the financial function origination is typically. So, and then on the back end, we integrate with banks, one by one, and there's a SaaS platform in the middle handling all the heavy lifting.
I like the way you started the problem statement by saying that we are your friend and not your replacement. The USP of banks and traditional financial institutions is their relationship and their customer base. And no matter what a new fintech company comes in, as a customer, I would place my money in a bank and not on a new age fintech, right? The trust is there with the bank. But the risk of the bank is technology innovation, which is where the new age fintech. So I think if you look at it from a partnership standpoint and build it, it'll be better for the consumer, lesser risk for the bank, and probably a better innovation and money making for the fintech as well. So I like the fact that you started with a problem statement saying that I'm your technology friend, building to help you make your customers better. And of course, your USP is to do all the heavy lifting on all the integrations that you mentioned on the banking financial system. So it's good. I can imagine the complexity. I myself have been a techie and grown up to be a tech businessman, but still a technologist by heart. So it's a highly regulated space, Val. This space is very highly regulated, and compliance is going to be a very key aspect. And compliance and security is going to be a very key aspect right from day zero, I would imagine, for a product market fit. So I just wanted to ask you, did you think about it ground up, or you figured out the product market fit as it went along and added compliance and security? I just wanted to know your views on how do you handle regulations and compliance and how it fitted into your founding journey as part of building the product for the banking systems?
There's a good and bad side to compliance. Like there's lots of people out there who try to start a business, like kind of quick and dirty, like with as little as possible, and that kind of like leaves the opportunity, like for if you're willing, like to, or if you willing and can, like invest into solving the extra complexity, like of starting that type of business, that gives you advantage, right? So because not everybody can. So that's kind of what we did. We understood that compliance is going to be fundamental for our success. Like it's like nobody would even talk to you. Like if you don't say like SOC compliance, like ISO compliance, like that's it. Conversation just doesn't go anywhere. Yeah. So we absolutely, while building MVP, we started Lions, we started SOC certification, like almost a few months into the journey, and later we added SOC Type 2, then we received ISO compliance, and that was just kind of mandatory for our type of business, and we were just positive about it because we knew that it's going to give us advantage, like long term, and it's a hard business to be in doing that.
Absolutely. So SOC 2 and ISO, I thought SOC 2 is big in North America, ISO 27000 is big in Europe. And there's a lot of overlapping. If you meet one, you automatically meet the other. From meeting the compliance standpoint, the number of checklists you have to go through there is a lot of overlap between the two, right? Between both ISO 27001 and SOC 2. Would you agree with that, or they are two different beasts?
No, I think your definition is fairly accurate and absolutely right that one is North American and one is more European. But when you work with banks, like it's they have clients all over the place, and their clients might be, because we're talking about business clients, right? So their clients might be big enough to impose the requirements on the bank. They say like, well, I'm like, like a client in London and I'm having that JP Morgan Chase account, and they kind of have to have it, and they didn't impose on all the vendors. Like you just can't work with them if you don't have it. The best you can get is that they tell you like, we will talk to you, but we will never launch production without you receiving the compliance. So that's the best you can get.
Yeah, good. I think so. The good side of compliance is probably it forces you to do certain basic amount of security, because security checklist is a big part of rating compliance. What is the bad side of it? You said there's a good and bad. I want to know what is your view on the bad side of compliance.
Well, the bad side is that it's kind of certainly slows down the business, requires more capital. Like it slows down for some of the good reasons, but some of it are, like some of those things are a little bit annoying, and they just like, we wish you would be able to move faster, and again, like the monetary aspect is that it cannot just dismissed, right? So like it just costs a lot of money. You need to bring consultancy in, you need to have like, like somebody who is like doing the audits, and they're not always, the best choice, and they might give you a hard time. They might not understand anything about, your area. It's like those overheads, like it's always slowing down the business.
I'll tell you what I feel is a bad side. The good side is compliance gets you started to do at least some aspects of security as a side effect of compliance. But the bad side is if you meet compliance, people think they are secure. And it is just a starting point, because from a business continuity standpoint and from risk mitigation standpoint, it should be the reverse. You meet security needs and compliance should be a side effect, as opposed to meeting compliance need and security being a side effect where it will not be good enough. So I have seen discussions where, including financial institutions and regulatory, where there's a lot of regulations, they look at compliance as a starting point to meet the security needs. And they think once they meet compliance, they are secure. And unfortunately, that is not the case all the time.
You're absolutely right. And you can't afford that type of thinking when you're young fintech. In reality, what you do, I mean, unless you want to be out of business in like in a year or two because of the breach, like we took a hyper practical approach. We always saw compliance as like additive to kind of like to pass through the gates, like with the clients, but the security and fortification of systems and processes, like and risk assessment was done completely kind of separate, like from day one. And the way we were building was always like security by design. And we kind of embraced like joking around like this security by obscurity, like I would just like use it as an anti-pattern always, like with every other team meeting, I'd say like, like just let's just see like if we're becoming that, like, and this is exactly where we don't want to be. We don't want a secrecy, like we want like if anything leaks, like we're still secure, and let's just design our systems this way. So we kind of took compliance, and sometimes we had problems with that because our protection methods were actually creative and extremely efficient, but the compliance would take it as sufficient from their point of view, because they just used to see some sort of like a checkbox type of thing, like in place.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you will explain it like by design it removes that risk, like it's a better protection, and they just wouldn't get it. It's a very frustrating experience.
I think SOC 2 was written by accountants. Accountants are good from a checklist and audit standpoint, and not from a technology standpoint. So I think that it's all about meeting the checklist in the way they want. So I can completely relate to some of the challenges you mentioned there. But very interesting point, and good to hear that compliance and security was part of your thought process right from day zero. Being in fintech, probably you did not have a choice, but I wish that sort of thinking trickles down into all businesses, not just fintech business. But you also mentioned a lot of integrations you do with APIs, right? I just heard you talk about at least 4 or 5 different third-party, Oracle, NetSuite, all the banking systems you integrate with. So API integration would have been a big part of your tech stack, right?
It's a many-to-many system. So like where you can imagine the complexity kind of multiplies, so like with number of endpoints on each side. So we integrate with many banks on the back end, and we on the front end, our own built applications connect to our system. So it's a lot of possibilities to leverage APIs, like and kind of like attack vectors.
And were you treating API security with some special attention, or did it require a different kind of approach or a different approach compared to just application security? Was there anything special you had to do for API security?
Well, I mean, there are like long-standing best practices for API, like which is just like you just gotta do, right? So like there's some creative work you need to do. There's some specific work for the industry that application you integrate with. Like I'll speak about the technical aspect like in a second, but at the end of the day, like what I always like remind my team is that about 2/3 of the breaches, like they're people related, like and you can't like, I love technology, like I spend all my life building technology, but at the end of the day, there's only so far you can take it. When your person picks up the call, like and just like hands over some data or clicks on a link, stuff like this. So a lot of effort like we put into protecting people from themselves in the company. So we would have like managed, like managed configurations for the computers, we would be very strict with the firewalls.
The API keys don't lie in the public domain, because API security, API keys, I have seen so many breaches because somebody stole the API keys and they're able to authenticate, and so those kind of things are also people related.
Exactly, and typically, the way you attack them is just you kind of embrace like KMS, like with some sort of like best practices that like you just don't have a chance for keys to lie around, except the testing keys maybe. So the worst you get like is like the testing key that you give to your clients anyway, like and that's where it gets to security by obscurity, like you kind of design with the mind that it could leak one day, like, and you're like, what's the worst that's going to happen? And you just accept it as a risk. So on the technology side, like the number of things we did was like encryption all the way, API gateway, like WAF, the application firewalls, like CEM, like security monitoring, event monitoring systems, like numerous data sources, anomaly detection, penetration testing, CI/CD stages, like all like, like fortified with different validations for security, self-reporting, self-healing at some point too. So like things like this is just so many things that have to be done.
Be honest here, Val. API security, as a security technologist, I can say API security is relatively an easy problem to solve from a policy standpoint, because the APIs are well-defined, the boundaries are well-defined, the function signatures are there. But some of the biggest challenges in API security is also to, if you want to put a policy in place on what is allowed, you mentioned web application firewall. If you want to put a policy in place to have an accurate policy that says only these are allowed and these cannot be allowed, to do it accurately for an API backend, you'd probably need a Swagger file, which is API documentation in a nutshell, right? So did you guys used to do proper documentation of API? Did you have an API discovery process in place? Shadow APIs was a big pain point. How did you address those things? Did you have Swagger files, documentation for every API you published? Did you have shadow API discoveries in place? Because some developer for solving some problem will create an API, publish it, and then have it integrated with the system to solve a use case. And then boom, it is there in the public system for anybody else to access as well.
Like while we're designing the APIs with assumption that like everything will be exposed, like at some point it is out of unintentional, like or intentional, like action by anybody. Basically, like the exposure of any API is, like is only so much risk, by design, right? So, but as a best practice, obviously, you kind of block everything by default, like on the firewall and some sort of like public, like entry point, and just allow the stuff that you want. And typically, the biggest problem you will have is just like some application release, like wouldn't work because somebody forgot to add the endpoint or something like this. And to look at the lists of the API, because like as the company grows and applications become like more, especially with acquisitions, like you might get like more applications added and you wouldn't know everything about them. Like what we typically have done is like time to time we would scan like code and systems, like we would use kind of penetration testing like tactics, like to kind of identify what API is sitting where. We'll have like a good penetration testing team, like, and we would rotate the teams, like for the sake of kind of like having a fresh look, like at that layout, and we'll capture and Swagger files. Like typically we'll generate them. So like I think like expecting people to do a perfect like definition and everything, like it's too much to expect at some point. So we would kind of like we just expect that people will fail at some point, like to do that properly, and we will generate it, and like and we'll contact somebody if they didn't do the right thing.
Yeah, designed for failure to mitigate the failures. You have to expect people to fail at some point and expect that to happen and build systems in place to mitigate those failures as well. Right? There is an industry research, and it's not just our own research. We publish an application security landscape report every quarter across our customer base. And what we find is from the point of a vulnerability being known to actually fixing it in code, it takes 200 plus days on an average, even for critical and high vulnerabilities. Is this something that resonates with you? Can you relate to it? And what do you think, if yes, what do you think are the reasons for that?
I understand it. I cannot relate it because it's for younger company it's just unacceptable, like, and like there's no way you can survive in a business in a fintech, like with those kind of like kind of keep like expectations. The clients will enforce it on you too, like in every contract there will be SLAs, like for how fast you should respond to like this and that. And like what you're saying is like I understand where it's coming from. I cannot relate, as like I find it completely unacceptable, like, and any technology I'm dealing with, like I'll find creative way how to reduce it. So the reason why it's happening in the bigger companies, because I worked with some of the biggest telecom companies in the world, like I flew around, like for years, like kind of like trying to help them address the challenges with internal systems. Like, and I've seen it all over the place. The problem is, lots of those products that companies are using, you typically talking about large enterprises, and lots of the products they're using, they were acquired, built, like many years ago. Some of them sitting on the mainframes, and over time people rotate, like people leave the company, nobody really understands what's going on. So, and they were built in the era of waterfall. Like it's like you have this project which estimate like, man, like in 2005 or something like this, I remember I was estimating project for like Australian telecom company. It was like something like 15,000 man days, and then we'll figure out how to like do things in parallel, like how to like break it down in stages like this. That was very common. And you just like plan a very big initiative, over multiple years, and you try to work with that. So that dictates release schedule. Like, you just like expect a big release to be a nightmare, like, and like it happens like once a half a year, like a few months at the best. And it's just culturally, that's how those products were built, and it's very difficult to change. So when you have the enterprise that is has a built-in fear of releases because it's such a traumatic experience, like it's like they just don't want to touch anything, unless it's absolutely necessary, and they don't have the process to push things fast. Like there's like we in Q1, like in Q2 now, they say like, okay, Q1 next year, that's going to be, like that's where our planning phase is still open, like everything else is closed. So essentially, like the solution for this problem is always the same. It's just you kind of need to move to transform your company towards, like more agile practices, like embrace like frequent releases, embrace the problems that come with it, and kind of like just like attack them head on, like, and the more frequently you do that, the better you become at it. Like, and I've seen some very large enterprises, like where like 30,000 people are working, and they would be able to accomplish it. Like you kind of do it team by team, and then you start seeing this completely unacceptable 200 days, like moving into something like 60 days.
I'm just going to push you a little bit further on that point, Val. Even though I think you cannot, I'm very glad to hear that you had good practices in place and it's unacceptable for you and your company. But sometimes, even with good intent, the nature of the application stack is not everything is owned by us, right? It is running on a third-party framework. It is, or maybe using some third-party frameworks. You're using some third-party components embedded in your application stack. You're integrating with many third-party systems, payment gateways, and each one of them has got its own development cycles, more agile or less agile. And any exposure in any of this third-party system that you integrate with as part of your app stack will have a risk, because of which you will not be able to fix it unless you own the code, right? And that is where it becomes a little bit challenging. And is that something that, like, if I take FISPAN as a tech stack, are there any third-party components, or are you, let's say, Apache Struts framework, that was zero-day vulnerability came up. If your entire application stack is built on Apache Struts framework, then the zero-day vulnerability would impact every application stack, every application in that code base.
You absolutely onto something, and like this is kind of like one of the worst case scenarios is you have like a third-party system or component you have no control over, but it's a critical part of your business. Like it does happen occasionally, but it depends on maturity of security practices. Like we can spend probably like 8 hours talking about like how to deal with that. Like like I've got a lot of like stories.
Yeah, I know. There's no perfect answer, but do you think virtual patching, as a technologist, as a pure technologist, I mean, you mentioned API gateway and WAF that you use, right? So do you think the web application firewall can be a stopgap, quick fix solution that while the third party, because we know the payload, we know the risk, and we can probably create a surgically accurate policy, at least to block the outside-in threat. So do you feel virtual patching has a role to play? And do you make that an integral part of your CI/CD pipeline to say, I have a security issue, but let me virtually patch it and release it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like it's a good component in the magnitude of measures you're taking. Like because like once again, the firewall itself could be vulnerable. Like the virtual patching might not work the way you expect, right? So like so you can't like as a like CISA, like or whoever is responsible for the security in the company, like and understand technology, you kind of need to plan for every single failure and estimate the risks. So like we would assume that the firewall can fail, like so our API would be exposed. Would assume the API can fail, so we have the firewall, to cover up for this. We'll assume that like encryption might break at some point. Like so, what kind of data we're sending there? Like, can we switch to tokens instead of like sending the raw data? Like you kind of like just need to scan for all those like possible failures. Like and design for that, but periodically
everything fails.
And periodically. Bring in people, like who has some expertise in like in a certain area, and ask them to challenge you. Like that's like people who deal with those security challenges like day and night. That's generates a very good practice, because there's always something you don't know.
Great. I think one of the key themes I'm keeping on hearing from you is assume everything fails and build defense in depth around it. That is seems to be the underlying philosophy that I'm getting out of everything that you're mentioning. So damn good. Further pushing on WAF, you mentioned you use WAF. Were there any specific product capabilities or any specific evaluation you did to get value out of a WAF product? I mean, if I talk to a pure technologist, he says virtual patching, no, everything has to be fixed in code. It has to be secure by design. But the reality is you always need a stopgap solution. You also need intelligence. You need things like DDoS protection. Not everything can be fixed by the application. So just wanted to get your views on, given that you mentioned that you use API gateway and WAF, were there any specific things that you looked for getting value out of WAF?
Got it. It's a good question, and I like, it's just a little philosophical remark. Is like like it's I just expect those things to be said, like by certain like roles in organization, because they just work at the different level, right? So like in their definition of what is right, like is very different, and I never try to fight it. I just expect that's going to happen, like, and this is okay. So that's why companies have like executives, like who are responsible for the end result, right? So and that's where like like doing a very smart thing by talking to executives, because you're talking to people who they will get fired, like if the strategy fails, right? The execution fails, like it's like they're responsible for everything. So that's a very good thing. So from the executive perspective, like anything creative you can do to shorten the time, like, or to provide some sort of mitigation meanwhile, it's all helpful, right? So it's all on the table. And back to your question of evaluating the application firewall, like I would be looking at the things like, first of all, credibility is very important, right? So like you can't just, like just pick a product, like it's like you're going to be first user, like, and you're integrating it into your, like as your only option. So it's typically just a bad decision. You want to see some credibility. So performance right out of the gate, like you will disqualify products immediately. This is not the most important things in evaluation, but if you don't have it, like there's no point continuing, basically, right? So like I would try to like see some proof, like at what scale it's working, like what's the overheads and milliseconds, like on different stages. Then a super practical challenge for firewalls is like out of the box rules, like, and like who designed them, like, and how much support we're going to have, like on keeping that firewall running, because typically, purchasing the firewall, like it comes with a human cost, like you purchasing firewall, but your biggest overhead is going to be like how many people going to be like exactly supporting, like troubleshooting, things like this. So maintenance cost, out of the box rules, like any sort of like hints to how previous customers had experience, like with that company, like managing it. And as a general rule, like if I represent technology company, like I don't want to be in the business of, like of creating firewall, right? So it's just, you just can't do everything, like, and you should be like very laser focused on your business. So like I should understand it to evaluate it correctly, but I shouldn't be doing my own firewall. So I would like to work with an expert, like where they thought about the rules, they thought about the best practice, and they bring it up to the table. So, and the last one, I'd say deployment options is very, very important, because you mentioned in the previous question that like, how do we deal with the situations when the vulnerability is not in our system, it's a third-party component, something like this. And that's where, it depends how important security for you. Like in the banking sector, it's like it's an utmost priority. So our design choices had to be assuming that it will happen, and you cannot act like you're surprised, like one day when it happened. And so we went with very granular service, like infrastructure provider. We went to AWS. This is the biggest reasons why we didn't use like a Google Cloud, because the granularity of your configurations, network configurations, like, and your level of control of the components is extremely fine-tuned. You can go like at any level you want. And that drives our choices, like, so because we wanted to be able to like cover problems ourselves, like if cover means like, like mitigate them while waiting for the solution, switch to alternative service, like, and things like this. And when it comes to firewall, we even, we even use some sort of like firewalls on the different levels, like different type of firewalls, and we'll have backup options.
Fantastic. I think we covered it all. You gave a lot of very crisp answer in terms of let the conflict and let that extreme point of view exist, and let them try to achieve perfection in whatever they are doing. But as an executive, you have to always be looking at risk mitigation at different levels, and web application firewall, secure coding practices, secure by design, design for failure. All of this has to be an integral part of your entire application development culture, stack, and philosophy as well to mitigate risk. There is no silver bullet. It's just a habit that has to be developed and learned. What would be your advice to new engineers taking up leadership roles in technology, and how they should look at security?
A little bit of again, philosophical remark is just to maybe put my point in the perspective, like put my recommendation in perspective to see if it's like something that people should take or not. Like I'm a big believer of, like people should understand how things work, like at a pretty deep level, like you like, because if you don't, like you can't evaluate the strategy, like you're relying on people who are doing just their part of the job. They're not always communicating properly, like you need to understand how things work. So if you're thinking of, like taking the leadership role in security technology, you gotta take some courses to understand, like have some comprehension, like what the penetration testing looks like, like how will people break in, like what kind of techniques will be trying, take some courses, understand that. Remember that at the end of the day, technology is only part of the equation, like there's a social engineering, try to do it, like try to just read about it, like see what techniques are used, and like do some exercises, like let's say like if you developer, like try to configure like security scanning or on a different levels into your CI/CD, like try to run them from your computer, like and see what kind of outcome comes in, like, and is it outcome readable? Is it useful? Is it noisy? Like understanding those things, it helps tremendously once you take a leadership position, because ultimately you're going to be responsible for hiring people who will be doing this job, evaluating their skills. You need to be able to ask the right questions, and you need to challenge some choices. Like, for instance, I expect the team will come up with the best answer, but I'm responsible for the outcome anyway. So like, I will need to change the choices. Like, why do you think this way? Like, have you considered any other options? How many did you consider? And being able to ask questions, that's, I think it's the most important thing, for leadership. And you cannot do that effectively, like after taking some sort of like management course, like on the leadership, like you got to, roll up your sleeves, like take some courses, understand how it works.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Val giving his insights and thought process, wealth of experience by being a founder and a very strong technologist. Thanks a lot for your time, Val.
Thank you. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions.